It's me, Mario.
Here we go. Listen, this worked to reach the next generation because a few months ago, we were at winter camp. In fact, about a month and a half ago, we were at winter camp. And when we were at winter camp, it was Super Mario themed, which feels like maybe a weird choice, but actually worked out really well. Like, what does Super Mario have to do with the Bible? Welcome to youth ministry. We figured it out. And so we were having this amazing, amazing time, and we decided, because it was Super Mario themed, we decided that for the kids' sake, we should probably warm them up before each session by putting on a little Super Mario skit with some of our leaders. It was a good time.
To say that our skits were awful is being really, really nice. We prepared maybe for 3 seconds before each skit, and we forgot almost half of the lines for each skit. And it makes it even more comical because almost all of the skits that we did, we stood in front of our kids with the script in front of us that told us who was supposed to say something and who was when they were gonna say it. And so, but that didn't matter. Our kids loved them. So much so that when we got off the stage or finished our message, they're like, when are you bringing the costumes back out? When's the next skit? Because we kind of broke the ice and cleared the air with terrible skits, they were able to let their guard down and really hear the message that Mike and I had and Jesus to give them throughout the weekend.
Yeah, and so the reason that we tell you this is because while we get paid to do youth ministry and reach the next generation at this church, it's also worth noting that, like, for us, even if we didn't get paid to do this, even if this wasn't our full-time job, something that I've noticed is that for me and Brooke, and for a lot of our other volunteer leaders, reaching the next generation has gotten really, in some ways, really easy. That we've actually discovered it isn't that hard, really. And again, I cannot emphasize enough how little effort we put into these skits. They were terrible. They were just awful. And yet, when the skits were over, our students clapped and applauded as if they had just seen Wicked on Broadway. Like it was the best thing that they had ever seen. Reaching the next generation has become, in a lot of ways, pretty easy. And the question that we should ask, that everyone in the room should ask is, what's our secret? Well, we're gonna tell you. And the reason that you should be curious about that is because for almost every single one of us in the room, you either want to or you need to reach the next generation. For some of you, when it comes to need, some of you need to reach the next generation because you are in a job that values virality. It values what's popular in culture. And what's happened in America is that pop culture is driven by the next generation. And so because your job is about capturing the hearts and minds of what's going on in pop culture, or what's going on, what people are into, or what goes viral, you need to reach the next generation. For some of you, the reason you need to reach the next generation is because you're a parent. And so since you're a parent, and since the next generation is influencing your child, who's also part of the next generation, you have a vested interest in figuring out how to positively influence the next generation because your kid is part of it. And then for some of you, the reason that you feel the need to reach the next generation is just because you are denying your own mortality and you want to stay young and hip and cool. So for all of us, for one reason or another, we either want to or we need to reach the next generation.
But for a lot of us, we don't really know how. What does it look like to talk to a teenager? They are very different than us. There's this chasm between us and them, which seems like it's getting further and further apart as the days go on. And they just wear different clothes than we do. They talk differently. I'm the youth pastor, and I feel like every week I'm learning a new lingo, a new word that means something different. Like, do you remember when sick doesn't mean ill anymore? It means like cool, rad. That's still happening. And the things that are treasures in their generation seem like a distant universe to you or irrational to you. And I bet none of them know who Belle Biv DeVoe is.
Oh, that girl is poison. Hey, fun fact.
Sorry.
Fun fact. My cousin is the DeVoe in Belle Biv DeVoe. Did you know that? So
no.
if you need free tickets, I probably can't help you. He and I aren't that close. But it's still a fun fact, though.
It's ironic that I stand up here today and say them, like they don't know who that is, because before this sermon, I didn't either. And so the only reason I do now is because he was like, oh, yeah, we should talk about it so I can, talk about my cousin,
Don't tell them that I just
cool.
wanted to talk about my famous
fine.
cousin. Don't.
It's fine. But we're up here to talk about reaching the next generation, and it's so, so important. It's something that we're really, really passionate about. But we're not going to leave you hanging. We're not going to come up here and say, reach the next generation. Goodbye now. You're on your own. Mike and I, over the years, have realized tips and tricks that make it easy, make it effortless, make it worth it. And so we're going to kind of let you in on our secrets and let you know what works for us. And we're going to tell you a few things today.
So, if you have a Bible, we're headed to 1 Peter chapter 5. 1 Peter chapter 5 is where we're headed. And listen, we've only been given one sermon to talk about this, and we're very passionate about this. And so we're actually going to jump around kind of a lot in Scripture because we have a lot of things that we want to say. But before we jump into those things, we just want to give you one overarching kind of gospel lens. Like if you were to embrace the gospel reality that's stated here in 1 Peter chapter 5, then it would really kind of help you to kind of embrace everything else. Everything else we're going to say after this point would come pretty naturally to you if this was something that you chose to live by, to put as a lens over your eyes to help color the way that you see the next generation. And so you see it up there. We'll read it. Here's what Peter writes. He says, "Give all your worries and cares to God, for he cares about you." And that is, we love that verse, don't we? Oh, it's so good. It's so simple. Oh, it's so beautiful. It's like a warm blanket, some hot cocoa. It's so good for the soul. The reason that we love that verse so much, though, I don't know if you ever thought about this. The reason you love that verse so much is because for all of us busy adults in the room, you recognize that it is a minor miracle, perhaps a major one, that the God of the universe cares about you. That for God in his everything that he has to oversee, for him to care about you and your little problems is crazy. It is unbelievable. When you imagine the amount that God has on his plate, so to speak, for him to have time in his mind, to have the capacity and the interest, not only does he wants you to cast all of your cares on him. He's asking for that to be the case. He's not just open to it. He's not just begrudgingly like, all right, here we go. All right, what's up? What's going on? What's up, buddy? Right? That's how we are with kids all the time. That's not how God is with us. He wants us to cast all of our worries and cares on him, despite the fact that he shouldn't care about our worries and cares at all. They shouldn't register. Your back pain shouldn't register with the God of the universe. What your neighbor's squabbles? That's stuff that shouldn't register with the God of the universe. If I'm the God of the universe, who friggin' cares what Jennifer from accounting said behind your back on Friday? Who cares? Who cares? But no, God, despite the fact that he is up here and we are down here in terms of maturity, in terms of what he values, in terms of the things that are important to him, he's up here, we're down here, huge chasm, and yet, despite that fact, God chooses to engage with us at our level with things that matter to us. So here's the statement. Here's the statement that I want to color the way you reach the next generation. Go ahead and put it up on the screen for me. When God's treatment of us in the gospel colors the way you see the chasm that exists between I don't know why I made this so long. The point is, God, I'm going to put this a different way, okay? God's maturity does not seem to downplay his empathy. In fact, it seems to exacerbate his empathy. God's maturity does not downplay or mitigate his empathy, it exacerbates his empathy. It embellishes his empathy. Perhaps that is actually what true maturity has looked like all along, is something that embellishes your empathy. So that's the overarching gospel lens that we're going to see through. And if you see through that lens, that's probably going to take care of most of this reaching the next generation thing. Because, I get it. You're busy and you have a lot going on. Oh my gosh, you have your parents, aging parents' health, and you've got taxes and you got finances and you got all this big stuff on your plate. And kids usually aren't walking around. Teenagers are not walking around thinking about that stuff. I totally get it. But when you intentionally choose to engage them on their level as God has intentionally chosen to engage you on yours, reaching the next generation is going to become pretty simple. But there are a few other things that we want to say about reaching the next generation, but that's the overarching gospel lens that I want us to live under for the next few minutes.
We are headed to 1 Samuel 3. And to give you some context of what's going on, it is about a guy named Eli, who was a high priest that was learning and working at the tabernacle at the time. And he had not just one, but two wicked sons. And the Lord had given him a message. And Eli didn't really take the message from the Lord as serious or really listen to what the Lord said to him. So, starting in verse 2. One night, Eli, who was almost blind by now, had gone to bed. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was sleeping in the tabernacle near the ark of God. Suddenly, the Lord called out, "Samuel!" "Yes," Samuel replied. "What is it?" He got up and ran to Eli. "Here I am. Did you call me?" "I did not call you," Eli replied. "Go back to bed." So he did. Then the Lord called out again, "Samuel!" Again, Samuel got up and went to Eli. "Here I am. Did you call me?" "I did not call you, my son," Eli said. "Go back to bed." Samuel did not yet know the Lord because he had never had a message from the Lord before. So the Lord called a third time. And once more, Samuel got up and went to Eli. "Here I am. Did you call me?" Then Eli realized it was the Lord who was calling the boy. So he said to Samuel, "Go and lie down, and if someone calls again, say, 'Speak, Lord, your servant is listening.'" So Samuel went back to bed. And the Lord came and called as before, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel replied, "Speak, your servant is listening." Then the Lord said to Samuel, "I'm about to do a shocking thing in Israel." A few weeks ago, we read this story with our students, and one of the first things one of my middle school students said was, "Wow, God really wanted Samuel to get out of bed. Doesn't God know that sleep is precious?" And for a middle school student to realize the importance of sleep made what God did in this whole story way more amazing. And we're going to skip to some verses starting in 19. As Samuel, what verse?
17.
Okay, yeah, okay. "What did the Lord say to you? Tell me everything, and may God strike you and even kill you if you hide anything from me." So Samuel told Eli everything. He didn't hold anything back. "It is the Lord's will," Eli replied. "Let him do what he thinks is best." Something that came out when we talked about it with our students a few weeks ago that I had never really thought about is Eli demanded Samuel to tell Eli what he was saying. And how old is Samuel? It's funny, I was quickly reminded when I was a teacher that when you ask a group of students how old someone is or yourself, you immediately are 100 or 85. There's no in between, no matter how young or old you look. And so in true fashion, when I asked our students, I got 100, 85, 57, 42. And to their defense, a lot of the characters we've been reading about in the Bible have been super old lately. And so when I said, no, Samuel was 12 years old. And ironically, when we were reading it, I asked, who in here is 12? And almost all of them raised their hands. Thinking that Samuel was 12 changes the whole story for me. I'm a 32-year-old woman, and what if a 12-year-old came up to me and said, I have a message from the Lord? Would I take it for what it's worth? Would I ask more questions? Would I say, yeah, maybe not today, maybe listen again? Eli never did that. Eli never questioned Samuel once. He took what Samuel said 100%. And the point of all this is middle schoolers are people too, and God uses people.
Say the first part again.
Middle schoolers are people too. And God uses people. We tell our kids all the time that age does not define the love that the God of the universe can give to them, or the amount that they can invest in their relationship with Jesus. That if God can use the 80-year-old Moses to part the Red Sea, or the 30-year-old fisherman Peter to turn the world upside down, he can also use a 12-year-old boy, Samuel, to give a profound message. We want to give our kids an opportunity to share and feel like they can. So, excuse me, when I was in this message and kind of going through, it really wrecked me to realize that God can use anyone at any age to give a message, and we don't want to stop them from giving messages. Teenagers are just a part of this congregation as you and I, and we don't want to limit them for how old they are.
Yeah. So, you guys ready to jump back into Scripture? We're flipping to another place. We are going to Acts chapter 1. Acts chapter 1 is where we're headed, and while you're flipping there, I'm just going to give you some context, okay, because we're jumping around a lot, and so I don't want us to get lost in where we are in history and where we are at redemptive history here. So, in Acts chapter 1, Jesus, he'd come to earth, he had died on the cross, he had risen from the grave, and unbeknownst to his disciples, he was getting ready to ascend back into heaven. Now, here's the thing. I don't know for sure that Jesus' disciples realized or fully knew that he was getting ready to float into a different dimension. I don't know that in this moment they realized that's what was about to happen. But you know how you can feel it when things are shifting in your friend group? You can feel that something's shifting. You can feel something's up. You can feel something is about to happen, or maybe somebody has kind of one foot out the door. You can feel that things are changing. And for the disciples Jesus just rose from the dead, for them, they had a pressing question on their mind, and that is where we will pick this up in Acts 1:6. They asked their most pressing question. They said, "So when the disciples were with Jesus, they kept asking him, 'Lord, has the time come for you to free Israel and restore our kingdom?'" Right? And so over the last few days, it says the disciples kept asking Jesus this question. They continually asked Jesus this question, "Lord, are you finally going to restore Israel?" And the reason, this makes sense, by the way, that this was the question that had been most pressing on their minds and on their hearts, because the disciples were Jewish. And if you are following, if you're a student of Israelite history, then you know that for the Israelites, their identity as a people fell under, do we have land and do we have freedom? And over again in the Old Testament, they acquired land and acquired freedom, and then lost land and lost freedom, and then acquired land and acquired freedom. Over and over and over again. That's pretty much a summary of the Old Testament. I mean, it's a bad one, but it is one, okay? And so over and over and over again. And so, when that was how God kind of interacted oftentimes with the Israelite nation, was kind of coming in so that they could have land, have freedom, and then they would rebel, they would fall away, and so God would be like, okay, well, there goes your land and there goes your freedom. So now, fast forward to the first century, and the Jewish people are under Roman rule. And so, since their interaction with God throughout their history as a people had been that when God shows up, we get land and we get our freedom back, it makes sense that the Jewish disciples kept asking Jesus, "Is it time yet? Is it going to happen yet? Are we going to do it yet? Are we ready? Are you going to attack the position of current power, the Roman government? Is it time to take them down? Let's do it." Right? They are so ready to have some land and some freedom back. And they believe that Jesus, the Messiah, that this is what he has come on earth to do. I don't know what that whole rising from the dead thing was about, or dying on a cross. Don't know what that was about, but it's time to do the thing that you're supposed to do, right, Jesus? And this is how adults think, isn't it? Attack the positions of current power. This is how adults think. But the way that Jesus responds to the disciples, I think, should give us pause. I think it should cause some of us to rethink. Because when they keep asking him this question and he finally answers it, this is how he responds in verse 7. He replied, "The Father alone is the authority to set those dates and times, and they're not for you to know. But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, and you will be my witnesses, telling people about me everywhere in Jerusalem, throughout Judea, in Samaria, and to the ends of the earth." It's funny. It's a little strange, actually. When Jesus finally answers the question that is most pressing on the disciples' minds, he almost blows them off. He's like, "Hey, attack positions of current power. Yeah, I don't know about that. But let me tell you what our plan is, okay?" And Jesus continues to lay out the plan, the strategy to change the world is not to attack the current positions of power, but instead for the disciples to invest positively in the common folk over time. That in first century, that for them to board boats and to do long journeys, to get the camel going and to go invest positively, share the gospel, disciple the common folk of the world over time. Jesus' strategy was that if we want to change the world, we don't attack the current position of power. No. Let's invest in those who will be in power later, or let's invest in the common folk, the nobodies of the world over time and see how the wave of culture changes in the future. And for the first century, that meant that they should go and board boats and they should go spread the gospel wide, because at the time it was just in the Middle East. That was the only place that understood the Jesus died on the cross thing. They only heard about that. So it's we need to go and spread this wide. That's what that meant for the first century. But I think this isn't thus saith the Lord. This is me, okay? I think in 2024 America, if we want to take Jesus' strategy and we want to apply it to today, then we don't attack the positions of current power, and we go. The Christianity's already spread really wide. I'm not saying we don't need to be missionaries. Missionaries are great. If you're a missionary, if you know missionaries, it's awesome. Support missionaries, go on missions, it's awesome. But if we want to change the world, then I think that we should spend a lot more time investing in kids and teenagers than we do politics, government, and corporate America. I think that's what. I'm not going to stop saying words. You can applaud, that's fine, but I'm in the middle of a point. I think that's what Jesus would have us do. And so if you're an adult and you spend all of your time trying to change the world by attacking the positions of current power, I just want you to know that way back when this whole Jesus movement first started, Jesus highly suggested, in fact, he pretty much commanded that that's not the way that we operate, that instead we invest in the world that will be.
When was the last time you talked to a teenager? Maybe when you were a teenager, whenever that was. Last week? 2 years? Never? We're headed to Matthew 28:19, and to paint the picture of what is going on right now, Jesus has risen from the dead, and he's chilling with his disciples, telling them some good words. And the section we're going to read is called the Great Commission, aka means super important instruction, so we should listen. Starting in verse 19. "Therefore, go and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Teach these new disciples to obey all the commands I have given you. And be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age." When I used to think of disciples, I used to think of some grown men sitting around a table cheersing wine with Jesus. But now disciples to me today look like a circle of teenagers talking about how Taylor Swift has made Travis Kelce famous. And In the original text, when Jesus said these verses, he meant, in your going, make disciples. Like already where you're headed, the people around you in your circle of influence is who you need to make disciples. And it got me thinking that, teenagers are really uncomfortable. They're really weird. They're really awkward. Whatever blank you want to use that fits you, go for it. I remember a time in my life where if I'm not doing something for the first time, I'm almost always about to put my foot in my mouth. And I have a great example that happened at summer camp. There's a picture to go on the screen. And so if you don't know this, we in student ministries call ourselves United Student Ministries. And so every Sunday, before and after announcements, we as a ministry say, I have some announcements for you. And so I thought it'd be really cute. We had some time to spare between the message and the next activity, and I thought it'd be really cute to have all of our kids do our symbol, right? And another little sidebar, we had been jumping for about an hour doing hardcore worship, right? Like all of us are jumping, sweating. And so I'm at the front of the stage, and I see a group full of teenagers standing with their hands like this. And I decide to tell a room full of teenagers to just go ahead and tickle one another. In my mind, I saw that as hee 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 hee, because we had all been sweating, and ew, no one wants to touch each other. To say the room erupted in chaos is being nice. That I immediately clocked that in the back of my mind, and I said, hashtag never again will I do that. But that's the point, right? If we're not practicing talking to teenagers, they will always feel unrelatable to you, uninterested in you, and unfazed by you. And in reality, you'll probably feel the same way about them too. In the beginning, we talked about how terrible our skits were, and they were terrible. But in the reality also that I bet none of our kids had ever compared their walk with the Lord with a Super Mario game. And it worked because we talked to them about something that they could understand. I had so many people throughout the weekend come up to me and say, yeah, Bowser is the devil. Makes sense. And I played Bowser the whole weekend. So I think that's why they kept coming up to me, and I'm like, are they telling me I'm the devil? But it worked because they could make the connection between their walk with the Lord and Princess Peach and Mario. So when Jesus said, go and make disciples, he meant teenagers too. That making disciples thrives on meeting people where they are. If you go up to a middle schooler and start talking to them about something they have no idea what you're talking about or do not care, I guarantee they're not listening to you. But if you go up to them and start talking about Gaga Ball or the Super Bowl or a sports team or something that they're involved in, I guarantee their walls will come down. We all know from experience that there's a process between hearing about Jesus and making a disciple. There's this process in between, and with teenagers, you can't give up on them. You have to keep showing up. You have to keep asking these questions. You have to keep being present. Do I mean jumping into the Gaga Ball pit every week so you can play with our kids? No. But whatever it looks like to start having teenagers in your influence, whatever that looks like to you, is great.
So, hopefully by now, we understand that it's important to reach the next generation, blah, blah, blah. Again, some of you came into today and you already felt the want or the need to reach the next generation. My hope is that the overarching kind of gospel lens for us, God's maturity doesn't diminish his empathy, it embellishes it. I hope that that's helpful for us to start seeing things differently when it comes to interacting with the next generation. That really, like, the reason that our Mario skits worked at camp isn't because they were well written or because they were actually written by ChatGPT. I forgot to mention that. And so I can't emphasize how little work we did on these skits. But the reason that these students loved them isn't because they were well written, and it's definitely not because they were well acted. It's because, generally speaking, students like us. And that's not all students. I mean, some of the students in the room are like, I hate you guys. That's why I'm here right now, right? And I get that. That's, I'm not talking about everyone. We could talk afterward. But generally speaking, students like us. And they don't like us because we're a certain way. They like us because we care about them. And because we treat them, we intentionally choose to treat them the way that God has treated us in the gospel by meeting us at our level and requesting that we cast our cares on him. And so this really only comes down to kind of just a couple of things. It's really just get out of your own way and then treat the next generation as God has treated you. And by now, we've talked a lot about the treating the next generation as God has treated you. But for some of you, you're still stuck at the getting out of your own way part. So real quick, I just want to touch on what might be holding some of us back from engaging the next generation, even here at CFC. For some of you, the reason, I'm not going to touch on every single possible thing. In fact, if you want to hear us talk more about that, then the Faith Forward podcast is going to, and that's a podcast that we put out every week, and you can find that on YouTube, and it's really good because we're on it this week, so it's really good this week. And so we talk more about this in greater depth for sure. But for some of you, the reason that you have stayed on the sidelines when it comes to reaching the next generation at our church is because you believe that you aren't blank enough to engage the next generation. Not cool enough, not funny enough, not smart enough, not biblically knowledgeable enough, not athletic enough, not relevant enough. Can I just encourage you with just something that's just true about the next generation? This isn't even really like a Jesus thing. This is just true about the next generation. This is just a generational trait of theirs. The next generation is so inclusive inherently that it actually bothers you. Like, they're inclusive almost to a fault, They're so inclusive that you wish they weren't as inclusive as they are. But we can leverage that. That means there has never been a better time to be a nerdy small group leader, to be an unathletic small group leader, to be an old small group leader, to be a geeky small group leader, even be a small group leader who doesn't have all of the biblical answers. There's never been a better time. And so for those of you who that is the reason, that's the excuse, that's that lie that you're believing is what's holding you back from engaging the next generation at our church, I'm encouraging you, get out of your own way, because the next generation is so inclusive, it's almost problematic sometimes. So, 4 things. That long statement, which just God's maturity doesn't diminish his empathy, it embellishes it. Okay, then next one. I don't want to read that. That's too much. Right, that's way too much. It's just too much to say. Middle schoolers are people too, and God uses people. If you want to make a difference in the world, invest in the world that will be. And when Jesus said to go make disciples, he meant teenagers too.
There's no better place than start volunteering with our kids. Come and talk to us for 5 seconds and we'll tell you how amazing they are, because they are. But has God stirred something in your heart this morning after listening to us talk about reaching the next generation? What does serving in our ministry look like? How do I get more information? How do I sign up? A big volunteer opportunity that we have in our ministry is to be a small group leader. Our goal is to give all of our students a safe and comfortable environment with a small group leader, someone who has started with them when they were in 6th grade and moves all the way up with them to senior year. Life is hard for teenagers, and to have another Christian influence adult to be there for them when times get tough over time, that they can lean on, that's not their parent? Someone to show up when they're in a play or in a basketball tournament is so important to us. Another way that you can serve in our ministry is to be on the welcome team. We need smiling faces to welcome our students when they're coming up the stairs. We need a friendly person to say welcome to our first-time guests, and a calming spirit to our parents before they're sending their students into the hang space, which almost feels like chaos. We've talked today mostly about teenagers because that's who our circle of influence is. That's who we're around 98% of the time. But reaching the next generation doesn't stop at teenagers. It's all children. And so we have a nursery and preschool opportunity. We currently have 3 preschool and nursery classrooms that are closed because we don't have volunteers to fill them. And we never want to be a ministry that can't meet the needs of our children, even if they're little ones. Mike and I will be in the lobby, and we are more than welcome to answer your questions or continue the conversation. But we need people like you. We need people like you to show up. We need people like you to love others. And we need people like you to be present. So I encourage you to keep praying, keep asking, keep discovering how the Lord can use you to impact the next generation.
Let me pray. God, thank you that you're a God who condescends, but not in a condescending way. You're a God who walks with us. You choose to engage us at our level. God, I thank you that you operate that way, that you've given us that as something that we can take and something that we can model and something that we can do too. God, I pray that we would be a people who intentionally reach the next generation, whether it's at home, in our neighborhood, at the grocery store, wherever. I pray that the people of CFC would be people who don't simply focus on the positions of current power, but that we